Brad had filed for divorce from Jenny. It was a complete shock to me, and I couldn't understand why. The kids were just as confused as I was. But a few weeks passed, and it was revealed that Brad had caught Jenny cheating with billionaire Thad Deont. That explanation spoke for itself. Jenny was changing once again. Thad was not only richer than Brad, but he was also considerably younger. Darla and I couldn't help but be amused by this turn of events. Shortly after Brad and Jenny's divorce was finalized, Jenny married Thad. To me, this was a wonderful thing. Thad didn't live in the Chesterton School District, so for practical purposes, Glenda and Mark lived with me and Darla all the time.
Before that fateful night, I believed my life, led by Mike Wilson, was on steady ground. Little did I anticipate the storm that was about to engulf it. All I held dear was either ripped away or dangled precariously before me. Yet, against the odds, I persevered, finding solace in a timeless verse: "The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all." My union with Jenny Smith commenced 3 months post my college graduation. 7 years into our marriage, Jenny's treachery shattered my world. I sifted through the sands of our shared history, seeking any hint of the impending tempest, only to find none. I was utterly blindsided. Our narrative began in the hallowed halls of academia. Jenny, with her allure and captivating emerald eyes standing at 5 feet 6 inches, became my beacon. Though not endowed with opulent riches, in my eyes, she was flawless. On the scale of divine beauty, she hovered at 9, perhaps 9.5. Her charisma was magnetic, ensnaring me wholly. We seemed destined, our ambitions aligned, or so I believed from Jenny's discourse. Thus, we embarked on courtship and eventually wedded. If Jenny epitomized allure, I embodied a quieter strength, standing at 5 feet 8 inches with sandy brown hair and a weight of 190 pounds. While I may not command the attention of a luminary, I have had my share of adventures. In the realm of social dynamics, I fared adequately during my schooling years, occasionally garnering glances from unattached women. The intricacies of our union need not detain you. Let it suffice to say, our paths converged in a statistics class during our adolescence. Over the course of 18 months, we became inseparable, and as graduation approached, a promising career awaited me, painting a picture of a radiant future ahead for us both. One thing that should have caused me alarm was that Jenny was very reluctant to take me to meet her parents, John and Elma. It wasn't until after the wedding that I realized that Jenny was completely shy of them. In fact, I think I might never have met them if I hadn't insisted on talking to her father before proposing to her. For a day or two, I thought we were on the verge of breaking up, but then Jenny gave in and arranged for us to visit her parents at their house. At this meeting, I learned that Jenny had grown up in a very poor family, and she was very ashamed of that fact. But it seemed to me that these were wonderful people, and Jenny had nothing to be ashamed of. They were warm, compassionate, and very friendly. They didn't have much, but they were always willing to share whatever they had. My father died when I was 14, and my mother died when I was 20, so I grew to love John and Elma Smith as if they were my real parents. They lived in a little house in an old, not the best neighborhood. It was a one-story dwelling of just over 1,000 square feet. It was simple, with 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. They had a decent-sized living room but a small kitchen. Nevertheless, John made sure the house was in good condition and the lawn was neat and trimmed. Elma, in turn, kept the inside clean. Over the years, it made me sad to see Jenny neglected by her parents, but whenever I brought it up, it caused an argument, so I avoided any mention of John and Elma but always kept an eye on them. I called them at least once a week, and sometimes I was able to get Jenny to talk to them. But beyond wanting to keep in touch, I listened to see if they needed anything. For example, one day, I found out that John's lawnmower had broken down, and he didn't have the money to fix it, so I bought a used lawnmower and told John that I had a new one and if he knew anyone who could use my old one. I think he knew what I was doing but accepted the more gratefully. Like I said, I had a good job that paid well, so I was willing to help if needed. I started out as a staff accountant for a fairly large manufacturing firm with plants in 5 states and 2 foreign countries. I worked in the firm's headquarters, where the accounting department consisted of only 18 people, including me. Despite the small size of the department, we handled all accounting and tax operations for all of the firm's businesses. Even though I was an entry-level accountant, I was paid a high 5-figure salary. But 3 years after I joined the firm, 2 things helped me advance my career. First, John Stanton, our department manager, retired. Second, I passed the CPA exam. At first, they tried to hire a new manager from the outside to replace John, but after the second option failed, I was offered the job. I was promoted to head of the accounting department, and my salary was raised to 6 figures. That made Jenny happy because now we could afford a bigger house and buy more expensive cars. Shortly after the wedding, Jenny became pregnant, and we had twins, a girl and a boy. At first, Jenny was not happy when she found out she was pregnant. She complained bitterly that it was too soon. She wanted to travel and enjoy life first. As for me, I was ecstatic. Fortunately, once the twins Glenda and Mark were born, Jenny became a wonderful mother. For the first 5.5 years, she was a stay-at-home mom. But once the kids started kindergarten, Jenny insisted on getting a job. With a degree in English, the only decent-paying job she could find was as an administrative assistant at a law firm. When I found out where Jenny would be working, I worried that she might be led astray. I had read many stories of married women having affairs with one or more attorneys while working in law firms. However, this never happened. The attorney she worked for was C.L.M. Flint, one of the original partners, and he was a 55-year-old man with a potbelly. He also had a wife whom he adored and 5 children. Mr. Flint was a devoted Christian, like his partners, and tolerated no fooling around. Our marriage seemed very strong. However, in the 6th year of our marriage, I noticed that Jenny was not in good spirits. I confronted her one day after she lashed out at Glenda for forgetting to put a plate in the sink. "What's going on with you, Jenny?" I said quietly. "You didn't need to snap at her. It was just a plate, for God's sake." Jenny started to cry. "It wasn't a dish. I'm just so depressed because I feel like my life is passing me by, and I don't have a chance to live. I feel like I'm just somebody's wife or mommy. There are so many places I want to visit, but we probably never will. There are so many nice things we can never afford. My life is..." I was shocked at the way Jenny described our life together. I thought she was having a midlife crisis or something and suggested we see a counselor. The suggestion was met with hostility. "I'm not crazy. I just want to live a better life." With those words, Jenny left for weeks on end. The kids and I walked lightly, but it wasn't all bad. Jenny would lose her temper, and for a few weeks, we would become a loving family. But then the disgruntled Jenny would reappear. I was convinced it was just a rough patch, and eventually, Jenny would snap out of it for good. And if she didn't, well, I married her for better or worse. I loved Jenny with all my heart, and I was sure she loved me. Besides, we had 2 wonderful children, and I knew Jenny loved them. They were great kids, and I spent as much time with them as I could, especially with Jenny's mood swings. I felt sorry for the kids because they didn't understand why Mom was sad and angry at times, so I tried to shield them from it and always told them that no matter how Mom acted, she still loved them to bits. On weekends, I often planned trips around town with Mark and Glenda. Sometimes Jenny would join us, but most often not. The kids loved having their happy mom on trips with us, but were relieved when we left their unhappy mom at home. Things were tense in our house until the 4th of July picnic that my company threw every year. It was a fun time for all the employees, and surprisingly, Jenny even looked forward to it. After that 4th of July picnic, everything in our house was better than usual. Jenny's mood improved dramatically, and our life got back on track. I couldn't have been happier. But then came the New Year's Eve party at my company's office, and my life became a living hell. Jenny and I usually skipped the company New Year's Eve party. Neither of us were big drinkers, and I loved dancing more than Jenny, so for both of us, New Year's Eve was just an excuse to drink copious amounts of alcohol and act silly. We usually took the kids out to dinner, tucked them in for the night, watched the ball drop, and then climbed into bed and made love to celebrate New Year's Eve. This New Year's Eve was different, as Jenny informed me that for the first time in years, she really wanted to go. She attributed this to the fact that we hadn't danced in a while. This struck me as odd because Jenny wasn't that good at dancing. It all seemed strange to me, but if Jenny wanted to go to a party to dance, I happily agreed. When we got to the party, I was surprised to see our company owner, Brad Carlson, there. The only company event he regularly attended was the 4th of July picnic. In fact, it was at the last 4th of July picnic that Jenny first met the owner of the company. It was apparent that everyone was a little surprised to see the boss at this particular party. The general consensus was that he enjoyed the picnic because he liked to participate in volleyball and softball games. He wasn't a bad athlete, but no one had the guts to tell him he wasn't as good as he thought he was. We had several guys who played baseball in college or junior high and one woman who went to Ohio State on a full scholarship to play volleyball. Once Jenny was settled in, I headed out to get drinks for us. No sooner had I returned, however, than the music came on, and Brad asked my wife to dance. He danced through 3 or 4 songs before returning her to our table. When I suggested that Jenny dance, she said she just wanted to rest, but half an hour later, when Brad showed up, she jumped up and danced 5 songs in a row with him. Eventually, I managed to get 2 dances in with Jenny before she cited fatigue. About 15 minutes before midnight, Brad came back again. Jenny didn't even look in my direction as she took his hand. To put it mildly, I was very angry, but I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my boss. "I'll talk to Jenny when we get home," I said, sitting there, pondering. When someone said there was 1 minute left until midnight, I looked around for my wife because I wanted the new year to start with a kiss from her. But I was stunned when I saw Brad pull Jenny to him and kiss her on the lips. Anger boiled up inside me, and I headed over to where they were still hugging. I jerked Brad away from my wife and yelled, "Leave my wife alone, you bastard." The room was suddenly deathly quiet as all eyes were on us. No one had ever spoken to Mr. Carlson like that before. I didn't care that he was my boss, he was out of line, and I wasn't going to stand for it. I didn't care if he fired me. My heart was racing, and I knew my face was turning red. I wasn't a fighter, but if Brad was going to do something nasty to me, I'd be ready to fight him face to face. But he only smirked. "Jenny, I think it's time to go home," I said through clenched teeth. I reached for Jenny's hand, but she yanked it away. "I'm sorry," Jenny said, taking Brad's hand, "but I'm going with Brad. This is just for tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." I was so stunned I couldn't get a word out. Before I knew it, Brad and Jenny were gone, and everyone was staring at me. It was the most humiliating thing I had ever experienced in my life. I left immediately and headed home. The day after, when I woke up on New Year's Day, I was suffering from the worst hangover I had ever experienced. The previous night had been too much crying and drinking and too little sleep. I raged against heaven and hell. I plotted and planned my revenge on Brad Carlson. I was convinced he had tricked my wife into leaving with him. I had already rehearsed what I would say to my wife when she came home, and I had no doubt we'd spend a lot of time in counseling. Yes, despite the total disrespect, I wanted Jenny back. I loved her so much. Still, I racked my brain for ways to really mess with Brad, but the only plans I could think of were extremely cruel. And just as quickly as I came up with one of them, I discarded it because I didn't want to go to jail over a piece of scum like Brad Carlson. It took 3 hours, but I was finally able to get my bad headache under control. I called the babysitter and told her I'd be there in a couple of hours to pick up Mark and Glenda. Then reality started to seep into my life, and I started to get paranoid. What if Jenny decided she wasn't coming back? That suddenly became a real possibility for me. What if she grabbed the kids first? I'd be screwed. So, I quickly got dressed and rushed to get the kids before Jenny got the idea. I wanted to start any conversation with Jenny from a position of strength. The kids were happy to see me but wanted to know where Mom was. It took everything I had not to break down in front of my 2 children, so taking a deep breath, I lied. I told them that Mom needed to go on a trip. They looked disappointed until I asked if they wanted to go to IHOP for pancakes. While the kids ate, I started making 2 lists, one about how we could get through this and one about how to plan for divorce. When I got home, I was both relieved and disappointed that Jenny wasn't there. I wanted to fix things with my wife, but I was afraid of what I might do or say. Then I saw the answering machine blinking. It was a message from Jenny, who decided that since my emotions were so strong, it would be best if we postponed our conversation for a week. She explained that Brad needed a secretary for a business trip, and she was going to fill in for her. Jenny turned out to be full of crap. The only person who would be filling in for her was Brad. I crumpled up my list of how to get back together and tossed it in the trash. The emotional pain I was feeling at that moment seemed 10 times worse than any physical pain I'd ever experienced in my life. It's impossible to know what it feels like unless you've been betrayed by someone you loved and trusted the most in life. During these days, I realized how a person could go insane and cause horrible bodily harm to those they supposedly loved, thoughtlessly destroy property, and yes, even consider taking their own life. All of these thoughts raced through my brain in an endless stream. Finally, thankfully, I was able to dismiss one of these thoughts. I would never kill myself because I loved my children too much. The thought of devastating them because of a selfish act on my part was repugnant to me. However, other dark images continued to arise, and a new one was added to them. Were Mark and Glenda really my children? I readily agreed when the kids asked if they could play in the backyard. I needed that free time to get myself together and start planning a whole new life. So, while the kids played, I started expanding my list of things I needed to do to protect myself and my kids in the coming storm. The first item on my list was a DNA test. I took a kit when we went to a restaurant. I tried to cover as much information as I could but realized I was probably missing a lot. So, the first thing I did was call a friend who had gone through a divorce and asked him if he would recommend his divorce attorney. He replied that he would not, but would definitely recommend his ex-wife's lawyer. I asked if I could get the name and phone number of this attorney. After a few minutes of searching, he gave me the information I needed. The attorney's name was Tom Watson, and he had an office with 3 other attorneys who dealt exclusively with divorces, wills, and probate. I called the number listed, even though it was New Year's Eve, because I figured I could leave a message and someone would call me back on Tuesday. To my surprise, a man picked up the phone, Tom Watson. I quickly realized I was talking to the lawyer I wanted to hire, and before he could blow me off, I explained my problem. He was probably going to set up a meeting with me until I mentioned that my wife's lover was Brad Carlson. Then he became very interested. He asked if I could come to his office at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. I replied that I could if I could find someone to watch my children. Please bring your children with you because they will help you understand what I think you should do. Before you come, I want you to gather all of your financial documents, including bank statements, credit card bills, utility bills, and mortgage payments. I also want you to list everything you and Jenny have spent over $100 on. Don't forget to bring birth certificates, marriage certificates, social security numbers, tax returns for all the years you've been married, and anything else that might be relevant. After gathering everything I thought might be useful, including a copy of the phone message Jenny had left me, I spent the rest of the day playing with the kids. In the evening, as we headed to Joe's Pizza, I stopped to pick up a DNA test. After swabbing the baby's cheeks and my own, I took the kit to the Federal Express office. The DNA test company promised to have the results in 2 days. I was greatly relieved when the test results showed that the babies were mine. The next morning was a bit hectic as I fed and prepared the children before heading to my appointment. I called work and told them I would be taking the rest of the week off. Tom Watson's office was larger than I had imagined, and after introductions, Tom led us into a spacious conference room. I took Mark and Glenda to the far end and gave them mini tablets to play their educational games. Tom and I sat at a conference table at the other end of the room. I broke down twice talking about how my wife had left me for my boss on New Year's Eve. I still couldn't believe that she had tossed me away like some one-day trash. Tom turned out to be very understanding and compassionate. He told me that things would get better, but I was in too dark a state to believe it. When I finished telling him about my problems, Tom pulled out a picture and held it out to me across the table. I want to let you know something before you agree to hire me. This is a picture of my cousin, Abby Carlson. She was once married to Joe Carlson, Brad Carlson's brother. Joe cheated on my cousin and then left her for someone else. I represented Abby in her divorce, but I got ripped off since Brad paid for his brother's team of lawyers. They swamped me with paperwork, and I was too naive to realize what they were doing. I had just passed the bar exam and still thought everyone was playing fair. Abby ended up on the losing end. It took me 5 years, but I finally got the judgment partially reversed. Since that day, I have been working on becoming a better family law attorney. Even though I didn't get Abby what she deserved, my partial victory pissed him off. So while I welcome a rematch with Mr. Carlson, I want you to know that Brad will sick his lawyers on you, especially since I represent you. But I promise I'll give you everything I have. That's enough for me, I said firmly. Let's get started. I suddenly felt good that someone was on my side and that I could finally fight back. For the next 3 hours, we went over all the papers I had brought, discussed what I could expect, and finally, I was asked what I really wanted out of all this. Of course, I would prefer none of this to happen, but that's impossible. So I want the house, half of the property, and untouched pension. No alimony and no child support. Perhaps you should temper your expectations, Tom said solemnly. But I'll fight to get all that for you. Do you want full custody? I shook my head, then clarified, if Jenny doesn't want kids, then I definitely want them. But I know she loves them and would probably fight for full custody. It seems to me that joint custody would be fair. Well, to be honest, I'm not hopeful. You need to prepare yourself for the fact that she's likely to get primary custody, given Mr. Carlson's wealth and the likelihood that he intends to marry your wife after the divorce. She may become a stay-at-home mother. Unless you plan to remarry and can prove that your wife is a stay-at-home mom, I think the best you can hope for is liberal visitation rights. But knowing what a jerk Carlson is, they'll probably fight for that too, Tom said glumly. That really sucks, I said with venom. I didn't do anything wrong, but I'll be the one who ends up on the losing end. As for your kids, that's probably a fair assessment. However, the upside is that if your wife marries Brad, you won't have to pay child support. But the downside is that you will still have to pay alimony. I'll gladly pay child support just to see the kids, I said. At the final meeting, Tom was talking to Mark and Glenda, and I wasn't in the room. I don't know what exactly they talked about, but Tom looked pleased when he came out with the kids. You must be some kind of father, Tom said as he took me aside, because your kids love you so much. Unfortunately, they seem to love their mother too, but not as much as they love you. I left Tom Watson's office feeling better financially, but very worried about how much time I would be allowed to spend with my children. Tom told me that he would draw a divorce and a petition for temporary custody of the children for me. We planned to serve it on my wife shortly after she returned from her business trip. 8 days after DD Day, Jenny called in the morning and asked if we could talk. I replied that yes and arranged for the kids to be somewhere else. Everything seemed to be going just as Tom had predicted. I was no longer under any illusions about Jenny wanting to reconcile. Although it was tearing me apart, it was impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. Our marriage was over, and Jenny took up a trade. I wasn't surprised when she rang the bell. Tom had told me to expect something like that. Nevertheless, I made her wait and rang the bell 2 more times. When I finally opened the door, it cost me a lot of labor to contain my emotions. I didn't say a word, just turned around and went into the kitchen to get a beer. When I sat down at the table, Jenny asked where the kids were, and I almost snapped. Instead, I calmly said, "So now you're worried about them?" I guess I deserved it. She quickly tried to reassure me, but I truly believed that our meeting would have been very ugly and dangerous. After I left you on New Year's Eve, I apologized for that. We didn't originally plan for me to leave you that night. I was going to tell you on New Year's Eve, but Brad didn't want to wait any longer. Besides, the trip came up because Brad was having problems at one of the plants. He convinced me it would be better to let you cool off, and Brad was absolutely right. I wasn't sure at first, but after that trip, I realized he was my soulmate. Isn't it amazing that your soulmate turned out to be super rich? Sarcasm came through in my voice. I assume you're here to talk about our divorce, so let's get to it so you can stop wasting my time. I have something much more important to do than talk to you. I need to take it as anger flashed in Jenny's eyes. You don't have to be rude and insulting. I don't care what you think, Jenny, I said. She was furious. She wasn't used to people talking to her the way I was. I don't have to sit here and take insults. Then leave, I said, getting up and heading for the backyard. I didn't really want Jenny to leave, however, given my state of mind, that would have been the best thing to do. But apparently, my attitude was making her nervous, and she lost her fervor. No, I think we need to get this conversation over with, she said. Then she rummaged through her purse, pulled out an envelope, and held it out across the table. I opened it and started reading. Tom was right again. The terms Jenny offered were quite generous until I got to the last paragraph. At that point, I almost threw myself across the table to rip Jenny's throat out. I threw the papers in her face. You can tell Brad Carlson to take this proposal and shove it up his ass. I will never consent to him adopting my children, and to offer me $100,000 to consent is just despicable. Mike, Brad, and I can offer the kids a much better life than you can. Screw you, Jenny, and to hell with your hubby, Mike. It'll be better for the kids, she began, ignoring my insults. I'll stay home, and they'll have the opportunity to attend better schools. They'll live in a better house and be able to travel. Those are things you can't provide. But if it helps, Brad is willing to pay you $50,000 to allow the adoption. Jenny, not only are you a total bitch, but you're also an idiot. What part of screw yourself and screw your soulmate don't you understand? I'm sure Brad will increase his offer to $500,000, Jenny said quickly. That's probably more money than you'll ever have in your life. We were barely making ends meet on your salary, and don't forget that Brad is your employer and your job could disappear in an instant. Even if he offered a $100 million, I wouldn't take it. I was on the verge of doing something stupid, and I had to calm down. I wanted to throw Jenny out the front door, but that would ruin Tom's well-thought-out plan. I glanced at the clock and then turned back to Jenny. I've had time to reflect on our marriage, and I've realized it's not pretty. You may think you have a golden kitty, but you don't. We had a pretty good marriage for a while, but for the last year, you've been a shitty wife, a shitty mom, and a shitty person in general. We weren't just making ends meet, but you were always spending more than you needed to because you have to have the best of everything. I don't need Brad's crumbs, and if Brad plans to fire me, I'll have to go to the EEOC right now. The court has given me custody of the children because of your abandonment of them. I didn't give up my children, she said angrily. Then the front doorbell rang. It's for you, I said with a smile as I headed for the door. As I opened the door, I saw a sheriff's deputy standing there. I stepped aside and let him see Jenny, who was standing just behind and to the side of me. He nodded and asked, "Are you Jenny Wilson?" After she showed him her driver's license, he handed me an envelope and told me she had received a summons. I grinned as she read the divorce petition and then ran away in tears. God, that felt so good. She just left and was served with the statement. I told Tom on my cell phone, "I hope you behaved yourself," asked Tom. It was difficult, but I behaved myself. However, Jenny left here in tears after she was served. I admitted, "I don't know what that had to do with you. You were hardly wrong about what they'd offer. They did, however, throw in one kicker that almost made me lose my senses. It looks like Brad Carlson wants to adopt my kids." He can't do that, can he? That's something I didn't expect, Tom admitted. As for whether they can take away your parental rights, that would be extremely difficult unless they can prove that you're a completely unfit parent. So you'll have to be extremely careful about how you behave around your wife and Brad. Also, try to stay close to other people who can be your witnesses if need be. I don't think that bastard Brad can fabricate a story and have his witnesses swear to it. I know you're a good father, but don't forget that they may try to twist even the most innocent events to make you look worse. Now that I know their plan of action, we'll be prepared. Tom, does it ever get easier? I asked, as the pain of Jenny leaving me came over me again. Yes, it gets easier, Tom answered immediately. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit that you're not as devastated today as you were the night your wife left you. However, there will be good days and bad days for a long time to come. And I want to warn you that as we move forward, we will probably lose a few skirmishes with Brad and Jenny. But each time we lose, we will regroup and find new ways to fight back. As they used to say in the 60s, keep the faith, baby. In the week I took off work, I made all the financial preparations Tom had advised me to make. I opened new accounts for myself and transferred half of all the money into them. I made arrangements for the twins to go to school after school. Their school had a program where kids could stay until 5:30. It was perfect because I worked from 7 o'clock in the morning until 3:30. This gave me enough time to get home, do some chores around the house, and still have time to put the kids down. The week also gave me time to schedule time with the kids. Jenny was very free to run the house, especially when the kids had to go to bed. However, I needed to establish a stricter routine if I wanted it to work. I made them bathe, brush their teeth, and go to bed by 8 p.m. They objected at first, but when I promised to read them 2 stories instead of 1, they began to look forward to bedtime. Spending time with the kids became a lifesaver for me. We became even closer, and surprisingly, they didn't ask about their mom too often. But one day, Mark asked if his mom would ever come back. I didn't want to hurt my kids, but I wasn't going to lie to them either. I told them the whole truth. Their mom had found a new man she liked better than me and wanted to live with him. What's more, she wanted him to be their new daddy. Both kids started crying, and then I felt awful. Perhaps I had said too much. So I quickly assured them that no matter what, I would always be their daddy. That calmed them down, and I got 2 big hugs. When Saturday morning came, it was time to take the kids to writing lessons. Even though Mom hadn't seen them in over a week, Mark and Glenda were excited because they were going to see Miss Darla. The writing lessons were my idea, which Jenny opposed. Like many little girls, Glenda loved horses and wanted to learn to ride. Mark just agreed because he didn't want to be left out. However, Mark quickly became a much better rider than his sister. Darla Lamson owned a horse farm that also offered riding lessons. She was an excellent riding instructor, and the children adored her. She was a cheerful soul with a beautiful face, but 10 or 15 pounds overweight. However, she had a warm smile and an infectious laugh. I liked her from the first time we met. Jenny teased me and told me I liked her because she laughed at my corny jokes, which was true. However, Darla was easy to like. "Where's Mrs. Wilson?" asked Darla as I stood at the corral fence. "Mrs. Wilson and I are getting a divorce," I answered honestly. "I'm sorry," Darla said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "No, it's okay," I said to reassure her. "It's just the way it is. I just hope we can keep the kids in these writing lessons. I have the kids now, but my lawyer says the court will probably give her primary custody and me visitation rights. I'm going to fight for joint custody, but things aren't looking too good." "Why?" "Well, once the divorce is finalized, Jenny will marry her rich lover. Then she'll stay home, and I'll have to hire babysitters. And the best part is that I work for that wife-stealing Brad, so as if things weren't bad enough already, I expect to be out of a job soon when he starts tightening the screws on me." "That's not Brad Coulson, is it?" said Darla, narrowing her eyes. "Yeah, do you know him?" "I've never met him in person, but I've had the misfortune of meeting his lawyers. He wanted 2 acres of my land, but didn't want to pay for it. All he wanted was to create a buffer between his property and mine. The only thing he did was plant dozens of trees and bushes. Hell, if he'd asked me to, I would have done it. But Mr. Carlson doesn't believe in asking, he believes in just taking what he wants. Anyway, his lawyers filed one motion after another, and I couldn't afford to fight him. Besides, the land was mostly swampy, and I wasn't using it. After 5 months of litigation, I thought I was wasting my money fighting over land. I finally agreed that if he would pay my attorney's bill, I would relinquish the rights to the 2 acres in his favor. As a result, my property taxes went down a bit. Nevertheless, the whole experience left a sour taste in my mouth for Brad Carlson. I hope I'll be around when he gets his retribution. Yeah, I agree with you. Brad is a real piece of. But my soon-to-be ex-wife chose him to associate her star with, and I'd like to be there too when not only Brad but my wife gets hers, I said, hoping Brad would leave her sooner rather than later. What will you do if Mr. Carlson fires you? Asked Darla. I've already started a new career. I'm a tax preparer, but I'm working as an accountant for Mr. Carlson. I've always done taxes and bookkeeping on the side to get extra money. I recently expanded my scope and have brought in 3 small businesses that want me to do their bookkeeping and taxes for them. It's still not enough to survive, but I'm saving all the money I can get from my full-time job and side business to help myself when I get laid off. Right now, I'm working out of my house, but I'm pretty sure I'll have to put it up for sale once the divorce is finalized. Then I'll have to look for an apartment. That won't be suitable for setting up a business. Well, if you can do my accounting work for the money I'm paying now, Darla said softly, I'd be happy to give you my business. I can't ask you to do that, I protested. If your accountant is doing a good job, there's no reason to change them. I don't know if they're doing a good job or not, Darla grinned. They were the ranch's accountants when my father died and willed the property to me. They're one of the big accounting firms in town, Minter, Smith, and Z. They handle my payroll, quarterly and annual taxes, and I pay them $2,000 monthly and about $5,500 for federal taxes. I don't know anyone at that firm, and the one time I called them with a question, it took weeks before they got back to me. I glanced quickly at Glenda and Mark and saw them happily jumping their horses over a foot-high railing with the instructor running beside them. Then I turned to Darla again. Okay, if you're sure, I'll take a look at your books right away. If I can do this job for the same amount of money, I'll add you to my huge client list. Darla laughed and led me into her office. She then pulled out the current year's books, which were kept by hand, and last year's federal tax return. I quickly determined that the price Minter, Smith, and Zeller were charging were simply prohibitive. I can't do it for the money they're charging, I told Darla with a smirk. I can't in good conscience charge you more than $750 a month and $2,000 for your federal tax returns. No, Darla protested. I'm willing to pay you that much. No, I don't work that way. In my opinion, your current accountants are cheating you. You are probably too small an accountant for them, and they don't care if you leave. I will only take you on as a client if I can offer you a fair price. Wow, I didn't expect that, Darla said gratefully. That's going to help me a lot. Since I got the ranch 3 years ago, I've had a very difficult time. Saving $1,250 a month will help a lot. Thank you. Oh, and it goes without saying that Glenda and Mark's lessons will be free from now on. I can't ask you to do that, I protested in vain. You didn't ask for it, Darla smiled. I'm telling you. Getting Darla Rancher as a client was a big help, but the divorce was just starting to heat up. It was going to be a long and ugly road. Besides, despite Tom's words about things getting better, it wasn't happening. It seemed like every week there was a picture of Brad and Jenny in the society section of the newspaper. It was so unfair. Jenny's life seemed perfect, and mine was in the toilet. Added to that was the frustration that there was no way I could figure out how to get back at them. I was lonely and miserable. 2 weeks to 8 weeks after D-Day, My day started out great when I got the call that Harvey's Hardware wanted me to do their accounting. But after that, the day turned into a total storm. When I got to work, I was informed that I was fired. I wasn't surprised and was even relieved. It was extremely awkward after the New Year's Eve party, although no one said anything to my face. It seemed like conversation suddenly stopped when I walked into the room. Still, losing my job was depressing. Brad was still pulling all the strings. Tom was already preparing paperwork to file a wrongful termination suit with the EEOC. He told me, however, that it would be a long, hard fight that could take years. But Tom sent out a press release about my battle with Brad, which I heard made my former boss none too angry. The day took a turn for the worse when Tom called me a few hours later to inform me that a judge had signed an order for joint custody of Jenny as of that evening. I was devastated until Tom explained that it wasn't that bad. The kids would stay in the house, but Jenny could live there too. Realizing how inconvenient that would be, she decided not to exercise that right. Instead, she picked up the kids every day after school and had me pick them up in the evenings. It was a nightmare for me. Every night, I had to keep an eye on Jenny and Brad as I picked up Glenda and Mark, and Jenny usually made sure I could see how happy she was. She would hug Brad, kiss him, or say something affectionate. I was totally depressed, and the kids, even worse, were totally confused. I didn't think things could get any worse, but I was wrong. As soon as Jenny got joint custody, her attorney started filing motions to change the primary residence to Brad's house. The basis of their motion was that I was denying Jenny visitation. They also claimed that I was trying to turn the children against her. Upon learning of this, Tom immediately filed a complaint with the court, claiming that I had never denied Jenny visitation rights. Moreover, he suggested that the judge interview the children. When they talked to their mother in the evenings, the children always asked the question, "When are you coming to visit us, Mommy?" Fortunately, the judge decided that the children would stay where they were for now. However, he made no mention of the charges against me. This lack of response bothered Tom because he felt that the judge was not paying proper attention to this divorce case. But he observed, it is fair to say that the judge has 30 or 40 cases pending at any given time. The judge then changed his order to require that we each have custody of the children for 2 weeks at a time. In his infinite wisdom, he decided that the children would be shuttled back and forth between our two homes. At first, I thought this would be extremely inconvenient for Jenny since the child's school was a 35-minute drive from Brad's house. But I didn't think about how devious Jenny and Brad would be. But I was soon to find out. As soon as Jenny left me at the New Year's Eve party and went home with Brad, I had to realize that I had never really known the woman. Truth be told, I don't think Jenny really knew herself either. Still, it's hard to let go of someone when you love them so desperately. However, the first time Jenny picked up Glenda and Mark, I was shocked by what my soon-to-be ex-wife told me. Jenny looked nervous but determined. Once the kids were in the car and out of earshot, she turned to me. "Please don't complicate the divorce. I still care about you, and I don't want Brad to destroy you. If you let Brad adopt the children, I will provide you with full visitation rights. But I want you to understand, I'm not going to let you destroy my relationship with Brad." Wow, I shook my head. And here I thought you were just cheating. But I was wrong. You're also conniving. You'd let me have full dating rights in a pig's eye. Screw you. I turned and started to walk back to the house. But over my shoulder, I heard her say, "You've been warned." I called Tom right after Jenny left and told him what she had said. Tom wasn't surprised. "I told you to expect the worst from Brad. Have you installed cameras in the house yet?" "The outside cameras will be installed tomorrow," I replied. "But right now, I have one in my bedroom, one in the kids' bedroom, and one in the hallway leading to the bathroom. They put another one each in the family room and the kitchen. Tomorrow, they'll put cameras in the front and backyard. That's all we can do right now." Tom looked pleased. "But keep in mind that Brad's lawyers will probably start making accusations of mistreating you. The cameras should disprove all the accusations. The days Mark and Glenda spent with Jenny were difficult. Brad had a very active social life, and he and Jenny were often featured in the society section of the newspaper. Or I caught a glimpse of them on TV. They often had their children with them. If it was a daytime event, in all the photos I saw, Jenny was radiant, and the kids seemed excited and happy. Wherever they were, each of these photos crushed my soul even more. I couldn't compete with Brad's money. I felt like he was stealing my kids, little by little. On Monday of the 8th week after Jenny's desertion, everything went downhill. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, I received a call from the children's school, informing me that Mark and Glenda were absent. I immediately called Jenny. "Are the kids sick?" I asked with great concern. "No, why would you think that?" Jenny replied smugly. "The school called and said they were absent." "Oh, that," Jenny said dismissively. "I transferred them to Chesterton Primary School. It's a much better school, and it's only 5 minutes from my house." "You can't do that," I growled. "I can and I did," she snarled and hung up. My frantic call to Tom did nothing to calm me down. He explained that we would fight to transfer to another school, but that a judge would likely allow it since the new school had a much higher rating. Courts, I have learned, do what they think is best for the children, even if it sends the worst message to the children. In this case, the message was that their mother could do whatever she wanted, and their father was powerless to do anything about it. As I sank deeper and deeper into depression, Tom warned me that the worst was yet to come. He warned me to be extra vigilant because, in his opinion, this was just the first salvo from Brad and Jenny. He was absolutely right, and I thanked God that Tom had insisted that I install surveillance cameras and transmit the images to the security company in the cloud. On Tuesday, Tom filed a complaint about the changes at the school. A hearing wasn't scheduled until 3 weeks later, but on Wednesday of that week, Jenny's lawyers filed a complaint accusing me of mistreating our daughter. I was furious, and it took all of Tom's calming influence to hold me together. However, 2 things happened, but I thought only one of them would end well for me. An emergency hearing was scheduled, but I was forbidden to see my children until the investigation was done. I wasn't even allowed supervised visitation with them as there was talk of legal action. Tom immediately got a court order to find out the details of the prosecution. He wanted Jenny to state more specifics. Fortunately for me, the judge did not believe their arguments. He had encountered this kind of subterfuge many times in the past. "Let me be clear, Mr. Silas," the judge looked intently at Jenny's attorney. "I take these allegations very seriously. If they turn out to be true, I will see to it that Mr. Wilson is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. However, if I find out that your client is trying to play a trick on me, it won't do Mrs. Wilson any good. I expect you to give Mr. Watson a detailed account of when, where, and what happened. Am I correct, Mr. Silas?" Jenny's lawyer turned slightly pale and nodded. I also noticed that the smile that Jenny had on her face was suddenly gone. The next day, Mr. Silas emailed the charges, but there were no specifics. I was furious that they were still playing games and trying to ruin my life, but Tom assured me that we had enough evidence to completely disprove their allegations. The emergency hearing began. "Okay, Mr. Silas, you made this accusation, so what evidence do you have?" the judge asked. "The children told their mother," the attorney replied, "and given the seriousness of the situation, we took immediate action to protect them." "Mr. Watson," the judge turned to Tom, "what does your client have to say about this?" "Your Honor, both my client and I maintain that the accusation is a complete lie, and when we prove it, we will ask the court to impose sanctions on Mrs. Watson. If Your Honor will allow, I would like to play a series of videos provided by Able Security at my suggestion. Mr. Wilson installed cameras inside and outside his home because he was afraid that this particular outrageous accusation would be made." Mr. Silas immediately rose to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular and questionable at best. How do we know these videotapes aren't doctored?" The judge sighed in annoyance. "Obviously, Mr. Silas, you are not familiar with the security system Mr. Wilson has installed in his home. The video recorded in Mr. Wilson's house goes directly into the Able security system. From there, it is stored on the security company server for 1 year. If my memory serves me correctly, the video is also stored in the cloud. You can only get the video from the server or the cloud with the passwords of 2 employees of the company. It is a secure system, and I trust it. When the videos were finished, the judge made sure that nothing happened at the time Jenny indicated. The judge was not pleased. After talking to the kids for about 20 minutes, the judge and my kids walked out. They were sent back to the hallway to wait with the babysitter Jenny had brought with her. After talking to the kids, I decided to leave it as a misunderstanding, but be warned, Mrs. Wilson, if it happens again, I won't look down on you. Your Honor, Mr. Silas rose to his feet. While we're here, perhaps you'll rule on the change of school. Yes, that would be appropriate, the judge said slowly. Having looked at both schools, I agree with Mrs. Wilson that Chesterton Elementary School is better. I interviewed the children, and they said they liked the school. I dodged a bullet, but I lost a major battle, and that defeat was even worse than I thought it would be. Mike, I'll be honest with you, Tom said. The judge's ruling was bad. It virtually guarantees that Jenny will get primary custody of Glenda and Mark. However, there were 2 positives in today's hearing. First, you won't go to jail and you won't be separated from your children, and second, since they couldn't charge you, you'll at least get visitation rights. Yeah, I know how that works, I said with growing anger. Jenny will find a way to ruin my visits. We'll complain, the court will tell Jenny not to do it, and those 2 cheaters will come up with some new way to ruin my life. Isn't there anything I can do to stand up to what they're doing? Tom shook his head slowly. Unless you move to the Chesterton School District and get married, I don't see the judge going the other way. That Saturday, the kids were at my house, and I took them to riding lessons. I usually enjoyed watching them ride and occasionally talking to Darla. Today, however, I was as down on myself as I could possibly be. My life was a mess. Not only had my wife left me and I'd lost my job, but as far as I could tell, her life was perfect and mine had turned to expletive, and she was going to take my kids away from me. It was so unfair. She cheats, and I get punished. Hey, Mike, Darla said, taking a seat next to me on the bench. You look really depressed. It can't be that bad, can it? I explained to Darla that when the divorce from Jenny was final, the kids probably wouldn't be coming to class anymore. I told her that in order to get joint custody, I would have to move to the Chesterton School District and get married, and I had no prospects for marriage. And there was no way I could afford to move to Marion County. No offense, Mike, but your wife is a Class A, Darla said. She's been treating me like dirt ever since she signed your kids up. When she showed up and started harassing me, I was going to tell her to get her ass somewhere far away. But then I saw the look on Glenda's face, and I couldn't do it. I grinned sadly. No offense taken. I agree with you. We sat in silence for a few moments, and then Darla straightened up. Hey, I have an idea. My house is half of this. It's in Marion County in the Chesterton School District. Why don't you move here, and we'll tell everyone we're married? Then you'll be on equal footing with your wife. I stared at Darla for a few minutes with an amused expression on my face. But then I started thinking about her proposal. The more I thought about it, the more I thought it might work. So I asked Darla to accompany me to my next meeting with Tom to explain the plan to him. He immediately rejected the offer. Mike, I realize you're desperate, but a sham marriage won't work. You'll have to produce a marriage certificate, and when they realize you're cheating them, they can give Jenny sole custody. I was bitterly disappointed, but Darla persisted. What if we do get married? We can't do that, I said immediately. No, hear me out, Darla demanded. Suppose we announce that we're engaged, and when you get divorced, we get married at the courthouse. In the meantime, can you move into my house? I have 3 bedrooms, so I can sleep in mine, and you can sleep in one of the others. There's even a den out front. You could run your accounting business there. You could pay me a token amount of rent and sell your house. What do you say? Tom shifted his gaze from Darla to me and then back to Darla. I was encouraged that he didn't immediately say no, however, he had his doubts. Okay, on the face of it, what you are proposing is not necessarily illegal. However, you will have to perform a real marriage ceremony. In addition, there are other things to consider. We'll have to draw up an agreement that spells out Mike's financial contributions to the house. I would insist on a prenuptial agreement that spells out what assets each of you will keep when you decide to separate. And if you divorce in less than a year, I think Brad and Jenny can prove that it was a dishonorable marriage. I'd suggest at least 18 months. I'll settle for all of that, Darla said immediately. My head was spinning, and I wasn't sure it was the right thing to do. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure, Darla. This is very taxing on you. Anything I can do to mess with Brad is all I can do, she said with a smile. From 8 weeks to 18 months after D-Day, after we had signed all the papers Tom had prepared, Darla seemed to be absolutely thrilled with the whole thing. I figured she must hate Brad as much as I did. The gist of everything we agreed to was that we would be married for at least 18 months and could divorce at any time after that. The division of property was clearly agreed upon, and we each kept what we had before the marriage and everything we earned during the 18 months. I paid rent to live in Darla's house, but the prenuptial agreement listed that as my share of the household expenses. The next day, Darla and I went to the county courthouse and applied for a marriage license. We each had blood tests taken and then waited for the final custody hearing. Tom filed for joint custody, and Jenny's attorney filed for sole custody. While Darla and I kept our marriage plans a secret, Jenny and Brad announced them to the world. Photos of their wedding details appeared in the society papers. Apparently, over 500 people would be in attendance. Not surprisingly, I wasn't going to be one of them. On the day of the final hearing, a knot the size of a ball tied in my stomach. Although I felt that I was now on equal footing with Jenny and Brad, I knew enough about the court system to realize that fairness and justice were often not the basis for the final decision. Jenny's attorney, Mr. Silas, began by detailing my shortcomings. Mr. Wilson is currently unemployed and struggles to pay his bills. He does not live in the Chesterton School District, where Glenda and Mark Wilson now attend school. In addition, we remain concerned about Mr. Wilson's mental state. Objection! Tom shouted, jumping to his feet. The judge gave Mr. Silas a hard look, motioning for Tom to sit down. Mr. Silas, do you have evidence that Mr. Wilson's state of mind is a danger to children? Not really, Your Honor, Mr. Silas replied crushingly. Then don't, the judge snapped back briefly. Mr. Silas picked up smoothly. Jenny Wilson and Brad Carlson plan to marry shortly after Mrs. Wilson's divorce is finalized. Mr. Carlson's home is in the Chesterton School District, and he has considerable means. Mrs. Wilson will be a stay-at-home mother, therefore, we believe that sole custody of the children is in Mrs. Wilson's best interest. After Mr. Silas had taken his seat, Tom Rose said, I would like to correct some misrepresentations that Mr. Silas has presented at this hearing. First of all, Mr. Wilson has no problem paying his bills. I am presenting his financial statement to prove that Mr. Wilson has enough money to pay his bills and take care of his children. However, if Mr. Wilson had financial difficulties, it would be because Mr. Carlson unfairly fired him. We have filed a lawsuit against Mr. Carlson's parent company with the EEOC. We expect a very favorable settlement when the case is finalized. In addition, Mr. Wilson has started his own accounting firm. I have attached the financial statements for this business, and you will see that it is profitable and growing. In addition, Mr. Wilson is engaged to Darla Lamson and now lives in her home in the Chesterton School District. They plan to marry as soon as the divorce is finalized. Therefore, we respectfully request that Mr. Wilson be awarded either primary or at least joint custody. As Tom took his seat, I glanced at Jenny. She had a stunned expression on her face. Brad's face was red with anger, and Mr. Silas's face red irritation.